at New Mexico State. One of the great lessons I learned while going to school, I was working in the computer center. I was married, making $1.75 an hour, and writing computer programs. And we had a particularly good basketball team that year. We went to the NCAA Final Four and ultimately lost to UCLA when they had Lou Alcindor, who went on to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But one of my jobs was I had to run off grade reports, and it was a weekend ordeal. You worked 48 hours straight. I would sleep on swivel chairs so I could get some rest during computer runs. And I recall working that whole weekend and no overtime, and the registrar's office was at the front door, 8 o'clock Monday morning, and they wanted to check out the grades on two of the stars on the basketball team, Sam Lacey and Jimmy Collins. And I'll never forget this. Sam Lacey was in bad shape. He had a GPA of .04, which was 4 Fs and 1 D. And they needed to do some type of massage to keep him eligible through the NCAA tournament. And they did do that. And then both of them got multi-million-dollar contracts and were cruising around Las Cruces. And I remember Sam Lacey had a yellow Lincoln and Jimmy Collins had a red Corvette. And I kept making my $1.75 an hour with no overtime. And it was at that point I realized life wasn't necessarily going to be fair. Now, you may not think of NMSU as a romantic place, but it truly is. That's where my wife and I met. And we fell in love and got married while we were at school. It turns out her sister, Linda, met her husband, Dave, and they fell in love and got married while at NMSU. And her mom and dad met many years earlier, fell in love and got married while at NMSU. And what's interesting about that, my wife Smokey and I both were from Albuquerque. At one time went to the same grade school, never met. We went to the same church at the same time, never met. We lived 1.5 miles from each other at one point and never met. So it took the magic and the mystery and chemistry of NMSU to actually bring us together. And that I hadn't met her is kind of amazing in and of itself, because there's something she told me that I'm not allowed to reveal to anyone, so I won't. But she was Miss Albuquerque, and in the Miss USA contest, and you'd think I'd run across her at some point. You know, when I talk about failure, I really like to think or talk in terms of how it's not that hard to succeed. It's really not that hard to compete. That's the thing that surprised me the most as I started working in the real world, so to speak, is that I know when I went off to college, they had us sit down. They said, look at the student on the left of you, look at the student on the right of you. One of them won't be here by the end of the year. 50% would not make it. And it terrified me, because I thought they would all try as hard as I would. And I didn't realize that half of them would just goof off and not put in the effort that it took to succeed. And when you get into a work situation, the way to succeed is find out what's important to your boss and absolutely exceed their expectations. And do it over and over again. You get into kind of a performance threshold. It turns out that in most organizations, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. The key is to get into that 20%. And you'll find it's not that hard, because there's a lot of people that just don't put out the effort. And what happens is, if you fall into that lower 80%, then it starts to distance you from your relationship with your management. And that takes you on a path of not getting to the higher levels of success that you might aspire for. I spent 7 years as a FedEx professor of information technology, and through that had an incredible opportunity to work very closely with FedEx and Fred Smith. And during that time wrote a book about FedEx called The World on Time. And it was a fascinating adventure to really do a deep dive in that company and find out some of what made FedEx what it is. You know, the ultimate compliment of a company is when the company name becomes a verb. When someone says, I want to FedEx something to you, that just really means you've arrived as a company. And some of the fascinating things that you learn about leadership that you can really do a litmus test on your own organization are incredibly useful. For example, this was the largest venture capital startup in the history of the world at the time, because it wasn't like a commercial airline where they flew a few cities. They had to, in essence, cover the whole United States the first night they opened up. And the cash flow was just killing them. And it was so hard to keep enough cash available to keep operations going until people embraced the idea of shipping things overnight. And one of my favorite stories was when the company was struggling with trying to keep enough cash flow to stay afloat. They sent people their paychecks, and in the note was, and in their paycheck was a note from Fed Smith, and then it said, "Here's your paycheck. If you need to cash it, go ahead, but it would sure help the company if you could wait a few days or weeks before you cash this check." And they were amazed at how many people waited weeks and months to cash those checks. And the ultimate status symbol, if you work for FedEx, is to have a copy of that check framed on the wall behind your desk in your office. And so sort of a litmus test I often ask companies when I talk about the leadership that made FedEx work was, if you sent a note to your employees and said, "Here's your check, we're a little short on cash. If you could hold off cashing it for a few days," how many would leave during the lunch hour and go cash the check, or would hang on to it to help build the company? Well, survey after survey of graduates of top business schools indicates that the single most important skill is communication skills, or interpersonal skills, the ability to deal one-on-one, deal with groups, the ability to be persuasive, overcome objections, avoid arguments, deal with conflict. So many great ideas never see the light of day simply because the person who has it is not able to communicate in a compelling way to get everybody on board and move the idea forward. A lot of students focus so much on their book work that they can tend to forget that. And in the workplace, you're going to have to collaborate with other people. One thing we can do in the school is certainly create more collaborative projects so students can work together and learn teamwork and self-evaluate and then group evaluate other members of the team. I think it's also really important that students get involved in social activities outside of the classroom, professional organizations, different types of volunteer organizations, or even fraternities, sororities, things like that. All of those are very important to developing skills. I remember when IBM sent some people to recruit our university, and I had some of the brightest programmers available for them to interview, and they were interested in that. They said, we can teach them the technical stuff. We're looking for your people who are natural leaders, who have the people skills, because those are harder for us to develop in college graduates. The thing I would be the most proud of in terms of ability is taking things that are hard to understand and making them easy to understand for students or business people. A lot of people talk about scholarship, and scholarship is viewed as being very heady and very intellectual, but one of the best definitions I ever heard of scholarship was taking complicated things and making them simple. And that really gets back to communication issues, because we're talking about a complicated technology. I mean, think about most of my career. We're bringing in a professor from the university to talk to us about computers. You can just imagine the grimace that you'd get from an audience. But to come in and make it fun. See, learning is the strongest of all human drives. And we take it out of people. We rob them from it. I mean, a little kid will fall down 100 times learning how to walk, because they want to learn so bad. Kids will ask why, over and over again, wanting to learn. But we tend to socialize that out of people, because someone asks a question, we act like it's a dumb question. Or if they ask for an explanation, we don't give them a good explanation, so they're reluctant to ask again. And so allowing people to get into a comfortable space where they're really learning and understanding, and seeing that look in someone's eye when they got it, and you know that you helped them get there. That's what makes it, being an educator all worthwhile. One of the important things I learned while I was at New Mexico State is that you do leave a footprint wherever you go. And as a student, I would approach different professors at different times with different needs. And I had a lot of challenges because I was working and I was going to school, and sometimes I would need some flexibility in scheduling a class, or I might want to challenge a class, or whatever the case might be. And it impressed me at times. I would come to some professors with a real problem and approach them for their assistance. And I'll never forget, I had one professor who looked at me when I explained a situation, and he said, "What's in it for me?" And I was just so stunned, because I thought professors were there to help. I thought they were like parents, they cared, and it just stunned me. And I contrasted that to an experience I had with Dr. John Loveland. I needed some help because I was really deciding if I was graduate school material. I'd been offered a position with NCR, and they would send me to graduate school, but if I made this career decision and I wasn't graduate school material, it would be an embarrassment. And John took the time to sit down. I'd taken a class from him, and he gave me the encouragement and honest feedback I needed to proceed. And I think back on that, one person just, with their footprint, they stepped on me and made me feel small and unimportant. And John Loveland encouraged me at a time when I really needed encouragement, when I was vulnerable, and he left a footprint. And the lesson I learned is that you leave footprints wherever you go, and you want to make sure that the footprints you leave help people be better, make the world a better place in terms of what you do. And that was a defining moment in terms of lessons learned for me at New Mexico State.